I call this meeting back to order. Welcome. We are resuming meeting number 99 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of all. Before we begin, I would like to ask all members and other in-person participants to consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. Please take note of the following preventative measures in place to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Only use a black approved earpiece. The former gray earpieces must no longer be used. Keep your earpiece away from all microphones at all times. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the sticker placed on the table for this purpose. Thank you for your cooperation. And Zoom reminders, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. We are resuming debate on the motion of Mr. Angus and on the amendment, of Ms. Stubbs. And we'll begin with Mr. Dreeshen.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank Charlie for bringing this motion up. We'll probably certainly be supporting it, maybe for opposite reasons, but nevertheless, I do think it is something that is very important. Just as a bit of a summary, the key part is finding out why this thing had spiraled out of control as far as costs are concerned, trying to get some clarity on the plans to divest and sell off the now completed pipeline, and the implications of the sale to Canadian taxpayers now and in the future. And we recognize the increase in export capacity and how significant it is. There is always that other question that says impact on the future cap on greenhouse gas emissions. However, this is where the real discussion is and always should have been, which is what is it worth to be sending Canadian oil and gas around the world versus importing it from other places, or simply hoping that people are going to do as some people in our country plan and just shut it down, and then everything will be so much better. I don't think that's reasonable, and there's certainly many arguments why we should be using the wealth of our nation in order to help the rest of the world, and I think people will look for plans that make that part of it. The sub-amendment that we are speaking of has to do with the study occurring as soon as possible and superseding all other work in the committee. And the reason is, why is this so important? We need to know just what was in the minds of the government, and we are talking about bringing in the Minister of Finance, who should have the answer to what that's going to do for the nation's finances. The Minister of Natural Resources, I think it's important that we talk to him. Quite frankly, I don't see us getting a lot from that discussion, because in many times he seems to be more in line with his role as the Minister of Environment versus that of Natural Resources. We are here in this committee to look at what Canada has to offer and how we can position ourselves in the future, and therefore when you have a Minister of Natural Resources that looks at ways to limit that, I think that's an issue. But certainly that's why we bring ministers here, is so that we can talk to them and find out what is on their mind and come up with some justifications as to what should take place. Of course, this all has to do with energy, and how are we going to take the great wealth that we have and turn it into something that helps all Canadians and can work from there. So I think really that's where I'd like to kind of start today. There's a lot of things that happen with Kinder Morgan perhaps we have forgotten about in the last 4 or 5 years, or longer actually. The basic cost of the pipeline and what this private entity had in the books was $7.4 billion, and it was taking a pipeline and increasing its volume capacity, and so a lot of what was required was already there. So the argument seemed to simply be, well, do we really want to sell more of our hydrocarbons and take it through the West Coast? And there's a lot of discussion there, and I think it was fair. I mean, the pipeline was 60-some years old at the time, so people wanted to see just what was taking place. So I think that's important. And then the government decided that it was time that because all of the other limitations that they'd put in front of them was making it very difficult for them to be able to make it work, said, okay, well, then maybe the government should buy it. And I don't think that was exactly the way in which the discussions had taken place, but the government chose to. And it knew, of course, if you're government, you're going to end up paying a lot more, but a lot more shouldn't be 4 times the amount. So this is one of the concerns. So what did Kinder Morgan do, and what was the whole point? The whole point to the argument of many people in Canada that wanted to restrict it was, why take more hydrocarbons, more oil and gas, why take it to Tidewaters? And of course, we know why it has to go there. It has to go there to be able to compete on the world market stage so that you can get a good value for it, so that it isn't discounted simply because the only option that we had was the U.S. And so that was the reason for it. And so it's very interesting as to what Kinder Morgan did with the about $4 billion or so that they were able to get after they paid down debt. I mean, a lot of it was paying down debt on project. But of course, if you pay down debt, that means you have some more flexibility to invest in other areas. And that, I think, is one of the key things as they were making decisions on their Permian Highway Pipeline project. They had a final investment decision that was made in September of 2018. So they had a natural gas pipeline aiming to increase the Permian Basin's gas exports to the U.S. Gulf Coast and Mexico. That total cost was $2 billion, and it was in Texas. So they were able to take Canadian tax dollars that we were paying for a project, so it wasn't though it had no specific value. They took that, and then they started building their pipelines in Texas so that U.S. products could get to Tidewater and go around the world. So that was one of the things that they had done. They had the TGP East 300 upgrade project, which was there to improve compressor faculty capacity. That is another type of thing that you can do to increase the amount of hydrocarbons that you're removing, is to make sure that you can upgrade the facilities that it goes through. And then the Kinder Morgan Louisiana pipeline, Acadiana expansion, increased capacity to the Cheniere Sabine Pass LNG terminal. A lot of these projects, they weren't a lot of money, like $150 million and so on. I mean, it's a lot, but not when you're producing to that level and trying to get assets out the door. But that's what we did. That's how we stopped and slowed down hydrocarbons to Tidewater. Is we paid them to take it to another country so that they could get it to Tidewater. So there is a certain irony to that. There is certainly an irony that by adding so many extra barriers that we ended up paying 4 times more than what we should have for that particular project. And I submit that it was by design, that people knew how much extra cost it was going to be. I know people that have worked on the pipeline, and some of the things that stopped them are head scratchers, things that, and everybody's being paid but people are being paid to sit around and wait for somebody else to make a decision. And that again, the intent was to slow down the project in its entirety. So that's why I believe that it is important for us to look at this. Yes, we can stay here and wring our hands about how we have to do our part to save the world from CO2 pollution, which I don't know. I guess I spent too much time teaching science to really jump on that bandwagon. But nevertheless, that's the argument that we all have to make sure that we are on side. We always talk about these other places in the world that are that we just have to make sure that we fit or catch up to what they're doing. We listen to the ministers talk about what other governments are talking about, as far as greenhouse gases policies are concerned. As I've mentioned in other times, my times with the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, we talk about food security, energy security, and of course security in the region, where of course Ukraine and Georgia and all of these other countries are affected by what happens with the Russian aggression there. These people, these countries, the businesses and the manufacturers are clamoring for energy, and they don't want to get their energy from Russia because they see what is happening. They understand the dynamics associated with that. But we sit back and say, well, here's a good opportunity for us to stop, because if we don't supply it, then maybe they're going to start looking at more windmills, because they've already got a bunch of those, and more solar panels and all of the other types of things that are really going to help them. Now, a lot of them are, when you talk to the business people there, they say, okay, well, yes, like any business that we have around here, if the government says this is what you got to do, okay, well, we're 100% on side until we can get rid of the government, so that we can try and bring some common sense back into the discussion. But I think, we talked about sanctions, and of course, sanctions of Russian oil into these places that could be markets for us. And everyone is very excited about it until you start realizing what really happened. And of course, that simply had Russia then selling into the Chinese and Indian markets, and so we find that they then do their production there. They have massive coal expansions that they have. They could continue with coal coming from Russia into China for its industrial base. And then, since there's no market, you can't buy anything from Europe because their manufacturing has tanked. We have to buy it from China. We have to buy it from India. We have to buy it from these other countries that, in the past, we simply said, well, we'll give them a pass because they need to build up their capacity, and it wouldn't be fair if we developed our country using oil and gas, and we didn't give them an option, to just pollute a little bit for a while, and we'll go from there. Well, they're not just polluting a little bit for a while. They are at a continual uptake of emissions. And it's not just greenhouse gas emissions, and that's something that I'm so curious about, as to how we think that a little bit over 400 parts per million is terrible, when greenhouses they pump 3 times that in so that they can have their plants growing properly in a greenhouse. We know if you take a look at where the drop dead part for the planet is a lot closer on the negative side if we go too low than it is on the upside. And so, but we don't want to talk about that, because that might cause a few other people to be excited and triggered. So, I guess really where we want to be is to look at actual environmental issues. And quite frankly, I appreciate the electricity portion. I mean, to me, electricity is such a critical component. And I think, when I used to teach my students about electricity, we kind of start off that you have your protons that are quite positive, and they make up the foundation of the atom, and you have these electrons that wildly go off in all directions, and when they get a chance to be free, they're anxious to go with the flow. And then you have neutrons that kind of help make up the mass of the atom, but they can't really get a charge out of anything, so they just kind of stay there. And then, of course, sadly, we've come up with another group, and it's maybe a little bit of a quark, but it's the morons that think that exclusive use of energy from electricity is the way to ensure a net zero environment. And obviously, the latter has no idea about the foundations required to produce, store, and transmit these little eager electrons that are always on a hunt for some place to land. And I think that's, you have to make sure that you have the wires to transfer them. You have to make sure that you have all of these other components that are necessary. And it is as though that is going to come out of thin air. We have proudly spoken of the minerals that we have and the opportunities that we all have to produce the raw materials that are needed for us to be able to take charge and to be able to be in complete control of that part of the supply chain. The problem, of course, is sometimes we have trouble getting a transmission line over some farmer's field, and we seem to think that we'll be able to start, having open pit mines and everything else to find all of these minerals, that we will take all of the caustic chemicals that are needed to process all of these different minerals once they have been mined, that we have some place for the tailings to go after that process has been spent. We seem to forget that that's how it really is. And it really is like that, whether you are here in Canada or whether you're someplace else in the world. Now, I submit, and I agree with many of my colleagues, that wouldn't it be better if it was all done in Canada? Because we make sure that we look after the environment. That's uppermost in our mind, even if we go through the mining processes, the same sort of thing as I try constantly to convince my colleagues about, for example, Fort McMurray. I've gone up there with many people, and you take a look into the pit where the open pit mining is, and it kind of looks like sausage making, and everybody can ooh and ah about how bad it is, and then you go turn around 180 degrees and you say, well, wouldn't it be nice if it was like that forest back there? Well, that forest back there used to be the pit. That's what reclamation is all about. You don't see that necessarily in open pit mining. We have other forms of getting electricity that people seem to forget how much impact there is in the environment for that. My colleagues that explain how important it is to have hydroelectricity. I believe that once you have chosen an area to flood and then wish to set up your dams, and if you don't count that area that you dispersed and the people and the animals and the other opportunities that were displaced there, that it looks pretty good with the sailboat on top, and we can all talk about how there is zero emissions from it and how it is the cleanest. But not if you're going to count it. And as I've said in this room before, if you count the environmental impact from the first shovel you use to dig something up and then create the energy that is needed until the last shovel that you have to use to cover it up once it has been spent, then we can start comparing environmental impact from one part of the 6 time zones that we have across this country to another, because there are strengths that we have throughout the nation. And that, to me, is what we should be doing. And the worst part is when we, and we end up, sadly, too much into the political side of things, simply saying, well, we're not going to allow you to do that over there because we do this over here and it's so much better. There's strengths to everything. But if as a nation we were to simply say, let's find where our strengths are, let's take the advantages that we have, whether it's from what we have in Alberta with our oil and gas, our hydrocarbon industry, we can make sure that money goes to other places and that it helps them. And if people around the world would just get to the level of the technology of oil and gas and the environmental safeguards that we have, all these projects down in the U.S. that they were lauding and going to, we'd blow them out of the water because that's how much better we are. But if we simply say, nope, we've decided that in order to find our place in the groups of nations that wish to reduce oil and gas, that we're going to take this, you better shut her all down. That's the only way it's worthwhile. That, to me, is a problem. And that's what I hope that we will be able to get to when we speak about the TMX pipeline. That people will at least sit back. I know it's the money's gone, but will they at least sit back and think about what contributions that those hydrocarbons have to the world, what they have to our nation, what they have to the people of BC and Alberta, where these products are coming from, and Saskatchewan. So when we start looking at the advances that we have, because we have such an amazing story to tell. And my other side of the story is you usually do better if government isn't involved. And I guess that's what my dad ingrained in me. He said that whatever the government says to do, if you did the opposite, you'd probably be better off. Well, this was a decision where had we just stuck to what was there at the beginning, yes, the extra little roadblocks that we put up would have made it more expensive, but certainly not more expensive than buying the thing and saying that's how we're going to solve this problem. Because we have sort of solved the problem. We are now going to be able to have much more water coming to, or oil and gas coming to Tidewater, being able then to displace dirtier oil from different places. But somebody's got to pay for it, And it's an irony to think, well, yeah, so we should have some extra taxes on the oil and gas system. Well, I can see where they're coming from. How else are they going to pay for that extra, $27 billion that was in cost overrun? So yeah, I can see where people are going to say, well, they should pay for it. Well, it would have been paid for in the beginning if government would have stayed out of it. And again, all of the things that are happening around the world by this relatively small oil and gas company of Kinder Morgan. I mean, if you compare assets and so on, the things that they ended up doing because we took an expense off the books for them, so that they had that capability, worked out well for them. And I could go on to other types of issues. We talk about, well, the U.S. and this is another thing we talk about with this Inflation Reduction Act and so on, and how it is that we have to compete against the U.S. The first thing that they did when they canceled Keystone XL was they stopped again. Well, that's how they managed to stop this going to the Gulf Coast. So what do they fill it up with? They fill it up with Venezuelan oil. They fill it up with other oils coming from other places. So that's what they did with it. And everyone, so people can stand up and say, well, okay, yeah, but that meant we didn't take any of the the heavy oil from Alberta. We made sure we stopped that. Meanwhile, the U.S. government then took that as an advantage to start filling all of its hundreds of thousands of pipeline miles and to fill it up with oil, shale oil that they had, and to be able to send it to the market, so that the U.S. actually became the largest exporter of oil and gas in the world. And that's simply because we got shut out. Here we were having the ability to do that with the reserves that we had, but political decisions that environmentalists, so-called environmentalists, jump up and down and say, well, that's so good. That's just one small picture. And I hope that we will be able to see that much bigger picture once we get a chance to debate this. So I certainly believe that this study should come about as soon as possible, and I'm prepared to see it supersede the other work that we have in the committee. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. I have next Mr. Angus. So, Mr. Angus, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, I want to speak to the Conservative amendment because I think we have a window on this deal that if we don't take this window now, anything we study later will be irrelevant. And that window really comes down to the fact that there's a number of key concerns that have never been addressed. But I'll start off with the issue of the sell-off of the pipeline. After $34 billion of public money, it is not a feasible financial operation to ship bitumen down that pipeline because the toll fees would be so extraordinarily high. We tried to get an answer from the Canadian Energy Regulator on the reports that they'd capped the toll fees at 22% of the cost, so 78% of the cost has to be borne by the taxpayer. That's outrageous. How in any universe are we going to say that taxpayers should pay 78% of the cost for an industry that made about $50 billion in the last 2 years? That's not going to fly with anybody. The reason we need to make this a priority above other studies, though, is the government has been floating an idea that they're going to sell the pipeline. So obviously, they've got an idea who they're going to sell it to. And I've been around politics long enough to know that backroom deals are, it's no offense, Mr. Chair, I think you're a great guy, but it is in the Liberal DNA, backroom deals. So who are they selling the pipeline to? If the pipeline gets sold off, then by the time we get to study it, it's going to be too late. I want to know, what are the terms? Because the Canadian public, at the very least, if we're going to look at this just on a financial cost basis, at the very least, the Canadian public deserves to be paid back $34 billion for this. So if we're going to give it to some group, or they're going to create some fiction group out of thin air and call it the Reconciliation Pipeline, how about telling us how much of a cut-down haircut that they're going to be taking on this that is going to end up being borne again by the taxpayer. So that's why I support the Conservative motion to bump this study up. The other areas, of course, are the Prime Minister went to COP26 and announced an emissions cap. And what we found out is that there were no prior discussions about how that emissions cap would be implemented. In fact, the Net Zero Advisory Council had never heard of the discussion about an emissions cap till it was announced at COP26. So was the Prime Minister just doing what he's really good at, which is going on the international stage and making grand pronouncements? An emissions cap is a serious issue, and many people who are super concerned about the climate crisis took the Prime Minister at his word. But an emissions cap is impossible if the one major financial investment that this government has made in terms of environmental legislation is $34 billion to massively increase bitumen production. There is no way you could impose an emissions cap, and there is no way you can meet the targets that they have been announcing. And we see that because Mr. Guilbeault is trying to pull numbers out of thin air and saying how it's actually not as bad. His best thing is it's not as bad as it looks. Well, that's a pretty weak excuse after 9 years of saying you're going to deal with the climate crisis, and that the numbers overall are actually going down. Well, yes, some of the emissions numbers are going down, and certainly the industrial tax on emissions has helped. But what we've seen is that in the oil patch, emissions have continued to rise. Those are the facts. And what we've seen is that with the announcement of the Trans Mountain being finished, production in the oil patch had its biggest increase ever. In fact, in February, production rose to 3.95 million barrels a day, which is bigger than ever. And that was based, according to ATB Financial, on the expectation that now they have a pathway to move 900,000 barrels a day. So expanding bitumen production is going to increase emissions. As I said earlier, to pretend otherwise is like saying, it's like when you're dealing with someone you're trying to get to go to AA and they're telling you just let them keep drinking, they'll drink their way to sobriety. It's not going to happen. So either there's an emissions cap or there's no emissions cap. And I think the least that this government can do is be honest with Canadians, because people are taking this issue very, very seriously. So we have the huge increases. We have the massive overrun of costs, and there seemed to have been no public input. There was no parliamentary oversight as to how this thing, this boondoggle carried on. There's the issue now of who's going to end up covering off to make this financially viable for some kind of front group. And it's all being done to the benefit of Pathways Alliance. And I've worked with the mining industry. It's the area I come from. I know many of the leading people in the mining industry, and we expect them in mining that if we're going to say that they're going to have to meet standards, they have to meet it. We expect the same from oil and gas. Yet last year we saw Rich Kruger, Suncor CEO, in the middle of the biggest fire season in Canadian history, talking about the urgency to make more money. In automation, so they were going to use less workers, and make more money in stock buybacks and dividends. If that was the biggest urgency that we were seeing in climate fire, well, there's serious questions that need to be asked. But the new Pathways Alliance head, Derek Evans, said that he believes that the emissions cap isn't fair and that it's unreasonable to meet the targets that are being suggested. So my question is why would we spend $34 billion aiding an industry right now that hasn't met the targets and even tried? Their numbers are going up. So if their numbers are going up, why are we making it easier for them to go even higher? This is a question about government policy that the government has to answer. And they haven't answered that. And people expect an answer because people are deeply concerned about where we're going. And when we look at other regions in the world, the amount of investment that's happening now in clean energy and long-term jobs, Canada's not even in the game. And we've been over a year promised these ITCs. Where are they? Biden came in. He brought an all-the-government approach. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of jobs. We can actually track the projects that are getting off the ground. We've been talking about a lot of projects here, but what we can track is $34 billion was given to TMX. That is going to increase emissions. There is no pathway to get lower under this plan. And the deep concern, which I'm going to end on, is the UN. Has been warning that the window is rapidly closing. The 2022 report said that there was, quote, no credible pathway to maintain 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the red line between catastrophic feedback events of climate catastrophe, and that the 2023 emissions gap report released in November 2023 reiterated that failing to sufficiently reduce emissions over the next 6 years will, quote, make it impossible to limit warming with no or limited overshoot. And Canada is failing. Canada is the outlier in the G7. Canada has failed to meet its targets, and we have a government that's now locked us in. So I'm urging my Liberal colleagues not to filibuster. I think it would send a very, very bad message as if government tries to filibuster a fair study, an open study. Everyone can bring their witnesses, but it's our job to get answers to the Canadian public. So I am not going to speak any further. I'm ready to vote on the amendment to the Conservatives. I come here in good faith. I think I'm asking my Liberal colleagues to do this right thing. Let's get this thing cleared up. Let's get on with this, and then we can finish our other reports so that we can continue to show Canadians that we're here to work.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. We'll now go to Mr. Patzer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, there's quite a few things I agree with my colleague, Mr. Angus, about there. There's lots that I don't, but at the same point is that we both want the same thing, and that's to get this study happening as soon as we can here. Because again, the amendment saying that the study occur as soon as possible and supersede all other work of the committee. Now, that's a perfect amendment because the study that we were just venturing into prior to this was a study on a topic that this committee had previously studied. And I find it quite fascinating that one of the first witnesses that we had here last week to speak to that previous study on electrical interties he was part of the study that happened in 2017. We asked, one of the questions that was asked of him, has anything changed since 2017? He said, well, no. So, I mean, there's the answer right there. So nothing wrong with shelving that one for the time being and getting on with this one. The government's well on its way to imposing electricity regulations and these other regulations, like their liberal fuel regulations, things like that on Canadians anyway. So it's like they want to do this study, even though they're already doing all the things that they're going to try to accomplish by, at the end of the study, say, oh, now we need to do these things. Well, they're already on their way to doing what they are planning anyway. So it's almost like it's basically wasting this committee's time. This study, though, is not that we want to happen right away. It would not be a waste of time because, as my colleague Mr. Dreeshen and as well Mr. Angus touched on quite spectacularly well, was the cost overruns. And when we look at the what the shippers through the pipeline are talking about, due to the uncertainty that this Liberal government put onto the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, the cost overruns that it has incurred is going to impact them. It's going to impact the tolls that they're going to have to pay, and which in turn is going to ensure that there's not a just not certainty for people that want to get through the next project, right? Or even for people who are going to use this existing project. So it's quite remarkable what the government is capable of screwing up. It's just it never ceases to amaze me. I think we need to get to the bottom of it. Like I say, some of us might be approaching why we want to get to the bottom of it from different sides of the issue, but nevertheless, we need to get to the bottom of it. And I think we need to prioritize it, and I agree with Mr. Angus. We should do that as soon as possible before this before the pipeline gets sold by the government. And if there is a backroom deal, this committee needs to figure it out before it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. I will now go to MP Jawari. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, it's good to be in this committee on a permanent basis. So I welcome working with all of you very, very closely. One of the reasons that I personally requested to switch from the committee that I was in to join this committee was the study that is ongoing, or it was ongoing until I believe partially on Thursday. So as I understand, we were talking about the amendment, and the amendment is talking about the urgency of the proposed study by MP Angus. It is my understanding that also in general there was an agreement that the disagreement is right now over the timing, and I was somewhat surprised to hear from colleagues who's intervened that we're not dealing with an urgent issue or urgent study, and I was taken back by that. And why? As I said, when I started looking into the need for the generation of the clean electricity and where the direction is the world is going, I've personally felt a sense of urgency to even come up with a proposal for a study and try to find a member in this committee who would table it. And I was informed that, great, you know what, there is a study, come and join, and I'm here. So let's talk about the source of urgency, because I think the fact that we want to look at that study after this study is done. It's already agreed on. So why is it urgent? So and why we should continue with the study that we're doing. If you look at the new report from the Public Policy Forum, what we heard was that we actually need to double, in some cases triple, the amount of green energy that needs to be produced for us to be able to meet our 2035 and 2050 target over the next 25 years. So the timeline is already given, and this 25 years basically is equivalent to what had happened in the past century. So we need to expedite the generation, the transmission, the distribution, the storage, and many other elements around it, which I will touch on shortly. So is there a sense of urgency? Absolutely. We have a very short runway. How long is that runway? It's 25 years. Now, how much is going to cost? We heard, I believe I heard from the officials that we're talking in trillions, and it says it's going to cost a lot. Most estimates are in trillions. And if you look at trillions, if it's $1 trillion, just to put it into perspective for the Canadian, if it's going to cost us $1 trillion, just $1 trillion, it's going to that translate to about $40 billion a year, and that $40 billion has to come from federal government, provincial government, a lot of organizations who are into, or companies who are into generation, from an investment point of view in the transmission, building more lines, enhancing the capacity on the distributors. Now, if it's $2 trillion, it's going to be about $80 billion a year. And just to give the Canadian a sense of what $2 trillion is, Canada's annual GDP is about $2.1 trillion. So what we are asking, or what we understand that we need to invest over the next 25 years in a very urgent way, is an equivalent of a GDP of Canada in 1 year. The nominal GDP is around $2.3 billion, $1 trillion. Okay. So we need to invest in a very short order nearly the GDP of Canada in 1 year over 25 years. Now, what does that entail? What it entails is that we need to do, as Mr. Greenspan said, two major things, and he called it major challenges ahead. Massively expanding how much power we make and making it all clean. So how do we massively expand how much power we make? Where do we generate the power? So when you look at the whole extended, as I call it, the supply chain of energy, when it comes to generation, and we have to massively expand, not only we have to build on the existing capacity, refurbish some of them, introduce, expand, but also we need to explore new areas. So, for example, everybody is now talking about nuclear. SMR, fourth generation, is now is being considered by some other countries. Wind, in Ontario, and I want to quote this. 5 years ago, the Ontario Tory government spent nearly $300 million to end hundreds of renewable electricity projects the previous Liberal government had signed. Premier Doug Ford said that the power wasn't needed and that the wind power was destroying the province's energy system. Funny thing, last week, Ontario Energy Minister, Mr. Todd Smith, outlined a power plan that includes billions in nuclear projects as well as return to wind and solar projects that the government once called a waste of energy. So what we see is, even in the generation, provinces that canceled many of the projects, now they are trying to be the leaders. So when you look at generation, from nuclear to hydro to wind to solar, now we are looking at, we're exploring geothermal, we're exploring areas that hasn't been tapped into, magnet, hydrogen. These are all sources of generation that either we need to do investment on, or we need to generate massively expand our capacity. With that expansive capacity and generating 2 to 3 times more electricity, naturally we need 2 key infrastructure elements. One of them is transmission line. The other one is huge storage capacity, industrial size storage capacity. So when you look at the transmission, when you look at storage capacity, for us to be able to build that infrastructure, enhance the existing structure, we need to start now. We should have started many years ago, but we need to start now. Hence, sense of urgency. You look at distribution. I talk about Electra, a distribution company in my neck of the wood in Richmond Hill and in York region. They need, for them to be able to meet the target of 2030 to 2040, they need hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. And it's not going to come from the ratepayers. It's going to come from foreign investment. It's going to come from relaxing some of the regulations, which we need to study as part of this study. And naturally, it comes to the consumption, as you could see, with the introduction of some of the government programs around greening, around heat pumps, around energy efficient projects, as well as electric cars. The amount of the consumption not only is going up, but also the infrastructure that's needed to be able to support it. A lot of households are going to find themselves that they need to be able to upgrade their electrical system to be able to handle that. So when you look at this whole spectrum, and we need to generate and invest in the tune of $80 billion a year to be able to make sure that we could double or triple the energy that's generated from all those sources to transmission, to distribution, to consumption, storage. Now you look at it and say, well, what are other elements that we need to look at? Is it just simple as coming and saying, let's build five more nuclear plant and 3 more SMRs? No, what we need is we also need to look at elements such as energy modeling. We look at different jurisdiction. Imagine, and if there's any company out there who's working on energy modeling, come and talk to me, because I'm very much interested. You look at the energy modeling and you look at it and you say, well, we have 13 provinces and territories and we have indigenous areas, and they have different characteristics, okay? And each one of those, if there is a company that's looking at those capabilities and is saying, what kind of energy modeling that we need to do to be able to find that balance, use and expedite and accelerate the need of generation transmission, I really like to invite you to come to this committee. We need to talk about management of the electricity. How efficient are we managing it? We need to talk about how do we optimize the energy. If there is any company, and I work with one of them, Edgecom, is leading where it's looking at all sources of energy and is trying to optimize based on the costs and the timing and the sources of all of these energy. We need to talk about those. Because aside from generation, we also need to look at how we're going to ensure that we could optimize the use of energy. We have to talk to consumers and understand how they can change some of their behaviors. We need to talk about integration of how we could look at different sources of clean electricity and how they can be integrated. We need to talk about exchanges. One of the areas that Electra is seriously looking is almost an exchange market that you look at and you say, okay, it's all these sources of energy is generated, but what is the best way for us to be able to exchange it so we can keep that rate to the consumers down? And you look at U.S. and you look at the current administration and investment that they did on IRA and what they are doing in making sure that they can generate enough electricity to be able to put on their plants. It's humongous, and we're behind. We are behind. We need to make sure move very quickly and probably with a different approach. He says, Mr. Greenspan says, no hurdles, no timeouts. We need to move now. So hence, sense of urgency. So now you come in and you say, okay, so you talked about the supply chain and let's say the model, and you're talking about energy model, but is that all? No, that's not all. We need to look at the social and environmental policies, both domestically and internationally. If we are going to produce products that uses electricity, and almost nowadays everything uses electricity, and then we are a trading country, and we look at the international trade that we have to do, and if they're part of our free trade agreements is that the product that's being produced is produced on green electricity, renewable electricity, we need to think about it now. We need to look at incentives. There is no way government of Canada, federal government, is going to be able to invest $80 billion every year. Let me give you an example. So if it was $1 trillion, it would be investment of $40 billion a year. The government of Canada's 2024 budget for defense is $44.1 billion. The healthcare transfer that we do to the provinces this year was $55 billion. So this is an enormous amount of investment that needs to be done. And government of Canada has the reconvening and convening power to be able to bring all these players in. But we need to also look at the incentive. Well, you look at the ITC, around clean energy, etc. We need to have experts coming in here and telling us what programs, what incentives do we need to be able to ensure that key players are going to come to Canada and invest. Because there is no way that $80 billion could come from federal government. Look at what Honda did. $51.1 billion investment in 4 plants. Why did they make that decision? Is because we have the capability. It was interesting. I was sitting in another committee this morning in OGO committee, and they were talking about foreign investment and why foreign investment is coming to Canada and what we need to consider. Well, aside from the fact that we provide an environment, a safe environment, and we provide, we have the philosophy of green, it also looks at the talent that we have and the direction that the government is taking. So when you look at these incentives and you look at the amount of, international investment that's needed, we need to build incentives around that, and we need to provide that environment, that sense of urgency. That cannot wait. Look at the amount of research and development
Point of order,
that
sir.
we need to do.
Mr. Johari, I'll just ask you to take a break for a sec, and we have a point of order from Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, I'm happy that you have joined our committee. It's great to see another member on the committee. But just for your own benefit, we actually just did a study on like ITCs and on what the U.S. is doing and what Canada's response maybe would be like that. So we already did that study. So I'm just wondering if you wanted to get back to the amendment at hand, that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
don't think that's a
Mr.
point of order, but
Patzer,
that's okay.
on providing your recommendations to the member. I'll let the member continue and proceed to why this amendment is, why he's supporting it or not supporting it, and this motion on the floor. So I'll let Mr. Johari continue in providing.
Thank
his
you, Mr.
rationale.
Chair.
Go
I
ahead,
think,
Mr.
I
Johari.
think each one of those areas, and I got probably 5 or 6 other areas to cover. It's talking about the aspects that we need to look at. So it gives. I want to give the Canadian the sense that the study that we are on, and we got derailed on, how encompassing, how important, and how broad it is, and what are the aspects that we need to take into account, and how urgent it is. It is indeed each one of the items that I'm dealing with. It's talking about the urgency that I believe exists, and it should not be superseded by the study that's proposed by MP Angus. So we talked about research and development. Let me give you an example. How many of us have taught magnet as a perpetual source of generating electricity, green electricity? What kind of investment or what kind of research and development are we doing on that? So research and development is yet another area that we need to really, really focus on. Now it comes into why are we doing all of these? We're doing all of this because we want to make sure that we have an adequate, reliable, affordable, and accessible clean energy for our targets for 2035 and 2050. So we have to increase our capacity by 2 to 3 times. And I haven't even started, bringing another element that needs other, need energy on top of the programs that the government has rolled out. Imagine over the next 25 years, if we have to talk about also food security, which a lot of countries are focusing, and we look at the source of energy that's needed to ensure the food security around some of the new innovations, specifically around vertical farming. So if you now look into an intersection of vertical farming
Chair.
as a source. Yep, that's
I'll
fine.
ask you to hold 1 sec. We have a point of order from Mr. Angus.
Well, I love the concept of vertical farming as much as anybody, but I'm just wondering, to just be honest, is Mr. Jawar, he sent in as sort of the ringer for the Liberals so that he can run the filibuster? Because I don't mind doing emails, but I'll sit here as long as it takes to get this study done so Mr. Jawari can talk about everything under the sun. I just would like him to be honest with us why he's wasting our time talking about farming. Is he going to filibuster? Be honest. Is that what the Liberals have sent him in here to do?
So thank you, Mr. Angus, and for your point of order. And I'll just remind members not to use point of orders for debate. But Mr. Jawari has advised members that he is a full-time member of our committee, and he's deeply passionate about the electricity study, is why you wanted to be here. And why I believe he was continuing and telling us why that study is important. And I'll let him continue on with his rationale. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Jawari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So why is it important? The vertical farming was just one aspect of food security, and all I'm trying to make a point here is that if we even talk about the intersection of food security and energy security, and we talk about food sustainability and energy sustainability, the amount of energy that we're going to need, it's not going to be 2 times to 3 times. It's going to be 4 times to 6 times. And if we don't act today, and if we don't focus on exploring ways to generate, transmission, distribute, store, manage, optimize, exchange energy now, and make that investments of nearly $80 billion a year, and find incentives, look at social impact, look at policies, and start working with provinces to ensure how we can ensure that through interprovincial agreements, we can ensure that security, which comes with the reliability, with access, and make it affordable and make it adequate. If we don't do those today, we've missed the boat. One of my colleagues across talked about the fact that we did a study in 2017, and well, nothing happened, so let's not do anything about it. Well, it's not 2017 anymore. It's 2024. And if you look at I believe when we talked about 2022 and 2023, and now in 2024, the world is moving in a very different direction. They are focusing on generating clean electricity. Each one of these industries is flourishing. The high capacity storage is flourishing. The transmission, the modeling, the management, these are all flourishing. Why? It's because everybody feels that sense of urgency. And it is that sense of urgency that I think the amendment is really ignoring. I believe it's already said that when we've agreed with the concept of doing the study, but superseding this, when we have only a short runway of 25 years, $80 billion,
Sorry,
and
point of
all
order.
of those elements.
Sorry, point of order.
Mr. Jawari, I'll ask you to hold for a second. We do have a point of order from Mr.
Yeah, I don't
Angus.
want to wait till the Blues. I thought the little runway we had was 25 years. Did he say our little runway was 45 years? I just want to know how little the runway is.
I could,
That's a
I'll,
clarification.
We'll go. We'll let Mr. Jawari continue with his rationale. Go ahead, Mr. Jawari.
First of all, I'm glad that Mr. Angus is actually attentively listening to what I'm saying. And if I said 45 years, that was a mistake. I have iterated a number of times. It is 25 years, and it's good.
Point of order, Chair.
Well,
Sorry, I'll ask you to hold again, Mr. Jawari. Mr. Patzer on a point of order.
Yeah, I just want you to get a chance to catch your breath here, Mr. Joyeri. But also, this is the whole point about why I said the report was done in 2017. You guys have been in government ever since then, and nothing's been done on this. So if it was that important, you'd think you guys would have acted on the recommendations of the report in 2017. But the witness said nothing has been done. So that was why I made the comment. So maybe,
Okay. I'll remind members again to use point of orders, not to debate, but if
Point
you
of
would
order.
like, let me just finish this,
Okay.
and then I'll let you go ahead, Mr. Angus, to not use point of orders for debate, but for procedural matters. And if you do want to add your insights, raise your hand. I'll put you in the list, and you can debate away. But Mr. Angus, I'm going to go to you on a point of order.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a point of order, and I really respect your work, and I'm very glad you made that. I think that was an outrageous comment by Mr. Patzer. It wasn't a point of order, and I think he should know that it wasn't a point of order. So I just want to say, if we're going to do points of order, we should make sure that we're giving our poor friend there a chance to catch his breath. He's got to look up some other stuff on Google. So I'm more than willing to let him go back, and we'll spend all as much time as we take.
Okay, so Mr. Jawari, please continue where you left off.
that wasn't a Google lookup. That was a picture I received from my granddaughter, who's 4 months and 27 days today, and she rolled over. So everybody's excited in our household, and her name is Ariana, and I love her very much. And I'll gladly show you her picture. A quick shout out. Okay, so why is urgency? So let me tell you, we need to move very quickly, and probably with a different approach. No hurdles, no timeouts. That's what Mr. Greenspan said. Now, there are significant unanswered questions about the new power mix and the speed of switching away from fossil fuel power in one of the biggest political battles brewing in our country. I mean, I believe MP Grisham went through a lengthy, commentary on that. But let me give you some stats. 6 provinces, including 3 largest, get more than 90% of their power from clean sources. That includes hydro, nuclear, and wind. 4 provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, still rely heavily on coal or natural gas for their electricity. The premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan have declared the 2035 clean electricity regulation too costly and have said they simply won't meet them. So there are challenges, yet we know we have to go. We have to move in this direction. We have to make an investment. We have a very short runway of 25 years, and here we go. And it took us over a century to get here, and now we have to work faster, and we have to work smarter. And all of those elements that I talked to you about was things that we really need to hear from witnesses. I personally don't think four session is enough, but hey, look, if we can get to all those answers in 4 session, I'm all for it. So the sooner we start on this thing, the better it is. Okay, and the federal government is quite flexible. We are ready to work with the provinces. We are ready to work with generators. We work with organization entities that they're in charge of transmission. and to come in and work together and create that think tank that, hey, look, how can we move? So we already know the question. Now we have to find the answer. 25 years, $80 billion a year, in my estimate. We know the sources of generation. We need to look at different ways, and we need to be innovative. We need to be agile, and we need to make sure that the end solution means that we have adequate, reliable, affordable, and accessible source of green electricity. So, Mr. Chair, I'll end by saying, once again, I believe the urgency, and I hope I have demonstrated over the last whatever minutes that I talked about, the urgency that's needed for us to deal with all those elements. And the urgency is today. And I don't think that study should supersede the study that we are in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. MP Jawari, for your comments and for joining us on this committee. It's great to have you and look forward to hearing more of you in the days ahead. We'll now proceed to Ms. Lapointe, who's online. Ms. Lapointe, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to start by saying that I am supportive of the study that is being proposed, but I can't support the notion that we would stop the work that we've already started with the electricity study. I think we're at a threshold of a pivotal era in Canada's journey towards a sustainable future, and it's crucial to acknowledge the indispensable role of our electricity grid in realizing our net zero emission goals. Our electricity grid isn't just wires and poles. It's the lifeblood of our economy. It's the linchpin of our environmental ambitions. It powers our homes. It fuels our industries. It sustains our way of life. Yet its significance extends far beyond mere convenience. It's the backbone of our transition to a greener, cleaner tomorrow. And a robust electricity grid is essential for integrating renewable energy sources like wind, solar, hydroelectric power into our energy mix. It provides the infrastructure needed to efficiently transmit electricity from remote regions that are abundant in clean energy to urban centers where it's most needed. And without a strong grid, we know that we risk stalling our transition to renewables and hindering our efforts to reduce the carbon, to reduce the goals that we have all established for ourselves. And we know what happens if we delay strong action on climate change. Well, we all know the answer to that question. We're going to have continued increase in frequency and severity in extreme and devastating weather events. Just today in Ottawa, the area is under a severe weather and tornado watch, and it's May. And we're seeing tornado warnings in Canada, something almost unheard of 20 years ago. Environment and Climate Change Canada's meteorologists continue to predict weather conditions for spring and summer 2024 that could lead to greater wildfire risks. More than 4,500 residents of Fort Nelson and the nearby Fort Nelson First Nation have just recently been allowed to return home since an evacuation May 10th due to the out-of-control Parker Lake wildfire just west of the town. On May 14th, close to 7,000 residents from the southern part of Fort McMurray were ordered to leave their homes and to evacuate from the Fort McMurray area. All of us were watching that news closely, and we saw the impact that it had on those families that had to evacuate. Luckily, the fire risk dissipated, but the trauma from the 2016 wildfire can't be ignored. What people went through in 2016 was horrific. And I believe that as legislators, we need to do everything we can to ensure we don't continue down this climate emergency path. We also can't afford increasing climate emergencies. We know that Public Safety Canada's Canadian Disaster Database shows the Fort McMurray 2016 fire cost over $4 billion, with an additional $3.6 billion in insurance claims. And I know that I've talked to many families who were worried about even being able to insure their homes and increase insurance costs to their household budgets and the impact that puts on them in terms of affordability. In total, the Fort McMurray fires burned approximately 580,000 hectares of land, and it caused the evacuation of over 90,000 people and destroyed 2,400 homes and businesses. And even communities far from active fires were and will be affected by air pollution created by wildfire smoke. And these conditions are often compounded with extreme heat. A few weeks ago, the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources said, and this is a quote, that last year Canadians experienced the most destructive forest fire season in our nation's history. And we know that climate change has been a root cause of their increased frequency and intensity. I think it's important for us as committee members to also acknowledge the physical and mental health impacts that results from these wildfires. The Minister of Health said that wildfires can have significant negative impacts on our physical and mental well-being, and even when they are burning thousands of kilometers away from us. So we certainly saw that last year, and we all saw that firsthand with cities across the country blanketed in hazardous smoke. I know that my colleague, MP Angus, we certainly saw that in Northern Ontario, and the fact of how hazardous that smoke was, especially people who live with conditions such as with fragile lungs. With the 2024 wildfire season approaching, our government is ensuring that people in Canada have the tools and the information that they need to understand and manage the health risks that are associated with the wildfires. I think it's imperative that we decarbonize our electricity grid, and it's not only dangerous to continue on the path of fossil fuel energy, it's frankly irresponsible. But the consequences of neglecting our electricity grid extend beyond environmental and climate issues. A weak grid, and we've heard witnesses tell us this, leaves us vulnerable to power outages, grid instability, and energy insecurity. It threatens the reliability of our energy supply, it jeopardizes the functioning of essential services, and it's disrupting everyday life. This means we need to do the work now, and that we need to continue with our electricity study, to hear from witnesses who can guide our actions in building a resilience into our electricity grid. The witnesses that we have heard to date, because the study is currently underway, have all talked about the need to act on an urgent basis in addressing our electricity grid. Witnesses have told this committee about the need to increase energy storage capacity and to ensure grid efficiency. And we know battery energy storage is a major part of this. And I can tell you that in Sudbury, we are actively working to produce the materials needed to support battery storage for our grid. The demand for critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all of these are essential for battery storage and also for the manufacturing of electric vehicles, batteries, and that demand is soaring. Canada, with its abundant mineral resources, particularly in regions like Sudbury and Northern Ontario, holds tremendous potential to become a global leader in the EV economy. However, realizing this potential hinges on developing a robust EV supply chain, from mining and processing to battery manufacturing and recycling. MP Angus had talked about, when he spoke earlier today, about meeting with mining leaders, and all of them have talked about the need to build that supply chain and the importance of that in conjunction with the critical minerals that we have. We often hear from our colleagues across the way that jobs are at risk in Canada's clean economy, but nothing could be further from the truth. I can tell you that in Sudbury, we're seeing an unprecedented demand for labor in the mining industry and an increased availability of jobs in the related value chain sector. Electricity is the future of mining. Our mining companies are transitioning from diesel-powered trucks and loaders and drills towards electric alternatives. And this is making mining safer, and it's also less polluting. Innovation in mining, such as moving to electrification, is part of how Sudbury Story went from being a mining town to being a mindful town. Our regreening efforts are globally respected, and electrification continues to help us lead the way. I attended PDAC this year and last year.
Point of order.
Where
Ms. Lapointe, we have a point of order. I'll ask you to just pause for a moment. Mr. Falk on the point of order.
Yeah, I've been listening really carefully, and she's talking about mining and electricity, that really has nothing to do with the amendment that we're debating. And I'm wondering whether perhaps she could rein it in. I know we allow for a lot of latitude, and I think that's useful and helpful, but she may as well talk about plastic straws as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Milkshakes.
Yeah, I think that's, thank you, and I'll let you do that if you like, but I think I'll let Ms. Lapointe keep providing her rationale, Mr. Falk, on your point of order, because she's talking about the importance of the previous study. So I'll let Ms. Lapointe continue on the rationale and why that's important to her. Go ahead, Ms. Lapointe.
Thank you, Chair. In Ontario, the independent electricity system operator is responsible for ensuring that there's enough power to meet the province's energy needs in real time, while also planning and securing energy for the future. And this operator, their annual planning outlook forecasts that Ontario's total electricity demand is going to increase by 60% over the next 25 years. And the report states that they do this by balancing the supply and the demand for electricity in Ontario and directing its flow across the province's transmission lines, and planning for the province's medium and long-term energy needs, and securing clean sources of supply to meet those needs. They oversee the electricity wholesale market, and they coordinate province-wide conservation efforts. And they say that energy storage will power the grid transformation. And they state, and I'm going to quote what the report says, after years of stable supply, Ontario is entering a period of need with demand expected to increase by 2% per year over the next 20 years due to electrification, decarbonization, and economic growth. Energy storage is well positioned to help support this need, providing a reliable and flexible form of electricity supply that can underpin the energy transformation of the future. Storage is unique among electricity types in that it can act as a form of both supply and demand, drawing energy from the grid during off-peak hours when demand is low, and injecting that energy back into the grid when it is needed most. Storage is particularly useful in supporting the wide-scale integration of renewable resources like wind and solar, because it can help smooth out changes in energy output caused by unpredictable weather. The report goes on to say that Ontario already has one of the cleanest electricity systems in North America, getting most of our power from hydro and nuclear generation. Energy storage can help leverage these existing assets while helping to enable more renewables to ensure clean, reliable, and affordable electricity for Ontario's homes and businesses. So, the Crown Corporation in Ontario, responsible for the safety and resiliency of our electricity grid, is urgently and actively working on protecting Ontarians from a failed grid. And I think as legislators, we can't delay the important work of hearing from experts who can guide our policy in grid protection, because we have to be willing to be able to partner with our provinces and our territories and our municipalities in this important work.
Point of
And
order.
I think continuing.
Ms. Lapointe, we have a point of order. I'll just ask you to hold for a second. Mr. Angus on the point of order.
Thank you, Chair, and I don't want to interrupt my honourable colleague, and I do appreciate that she did the shout-out for the Cobalt Fire, which was just in my back 40 and went from 0 to 14 hectares to 164 hectares in an hour during our committee hearings last week. So I was paying a lot of attention to our family loading their car up, whereas now I'm trying to really keep my eyes open here. And the fire in Cobalt is still out of control. But I just wanted to ask my honourable colleague, with all due respect, because we have 15 minutes left, if she's planning on talking the clock out, will there be other interventions? Because I could pack my bags, we could do other stuff. So I've just as a respect to colleagues, I don't know how long the thing she's reading is, but maybe is it like 10 minutes, 5 minutes,
So-
15 minutes? If she could just give us a heads up, it would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, on the point of order. We do have other speakers on the speaking order as well, but Ms. Lapointe does have the floor, and I'll allow Ms. Lapointe to continue on why she think it's important to do the electricity study, which I've heard much of her rationale about. So, Ms. Lapointe, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank Thank you, Chair, and I am very close to closing in my comments. I think that continuing work to build a reliable and an affordable and sustainable electricity system is critical in ensuring communities will flourish and businesses will have the confidence to invest and industries can decarbonize. And we know that a strong and a resilient electricity grid is also a matter of national security. Innovation, powerful AI applications, and supercomputers all require significant amounts of electricity. Developing the resilience of our grid is critical, and we have witnesses who can share their expertise on developing this resilience with our committee. We had a number of witnesses before us last week, in fact, and unfortunately, we weren't able to hear all of their testimony. Ultimately, we can't delay our study on Canada's electricity and grid network. There's too much at stake to allow a less pressing but no less important issue to take precedence over our current study. And I want to thank the chair for giving me this time today at committee.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. We'll now go to MP Shifke.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts on what we were discussing today. At first, I guess I want to start, Chair, by sharing with my colleague, MP Angus, that I don't oppose the study that he's put forward. In fact, I look forward to being a part of that discussion. I look forward to having the testimony before us and studying that.
Point of order.
The issue.
MP Shifke, I'll ask you to hold for a second. We have a point of order from Mr. Angus.
Well, I've been in a lot of committees that have been really toxic, and I really appreciate that he reached out, and I want to reach across the aisle to him and say, that's fantastic, so why don't we put this to a vote?
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I'm not sure if that's a point of order, but a conversation we're having. I will, MP Shifke, I'll ask you to continue where you left off. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. What I was going to add to that, though, Chair, was that unfortunately, even though I agree with the substance of the motion, there's one component that I do not agree with, and that is the component that essentially states that this study would supersede all the other studies, including the one that we just embarked on. And the reason I can't agree with that, and the reason I will not be supporting the motion as it is written and as it was amended, is because the study with regards to Canada's electrical grid is one that's incredibly important to my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. And it's actually, I was very excited when I got appointed to this committee to have been told that this was going to be the first study that we were going to be embarking on. And the reason it's important to my community, Chair, is that my community has experienced over the last 2 years significant environmental events, unprecedented environmental events that led to tens of thousands of my constituents being without power several times in the midst of the cold winter in January and February for several days. And it brought to light the challenges that remain in Canada, whether it's my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges or communities that my fellow members of all parties represent, that are represented on this committee. And so if you're looking for the aspect that's most important to me, Chair, of the motion that was put forward of the electricity grid study, it's the component that deals with the challenges to improve electrical production and distribution across Canada. Distribution for me is key. Chair, last January of 2023, we had yet another ice storm in Canada. It was the second worst ice storm in our history, second only to the one that we experienced in the late 90s, where several 100,000 Quebecers, thousands in my own community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges, and my honorable colleague from the Bloc Québécois will remember this well, were left without power. And the reason they were left without power is, for the most part, because of the extra weight that was put on the transmission lines that either A, couldn't have been supported by the existing infrastructure, or B, was damaged by falling trees. And in some cases, it took up to 6 days to restore power when we had temperatures in the overnight, in the evenings, going down to minus 15, minus 16 degrees. And Chair, it got to the point where not only did my municipalities have to open up emergency centers, the community centers had to be turned into emergency centers where seniors or those who didn't have access to some form of a generator had to go into those community centers overnight and then return to their homes during the day and then make their way back to the community centers overnight. And something else that was compounded by that, Chair, is that while all of this was going on, we didn't have a way as elected officials, whether it was myself as the federal member or the two provincial members, Marie-Claude Nichols and Marilyn Picard, respectively, and the mayors, we didn't have access to any way to communicate with one another. What happened when we lost electricity was that the telecommunications system in the province, particularly in the south, was so heavily affected by the loss of power that we couldn't even communicate our collective response to the tens of thousands of our constituents that we needed to respond to. And so the discussion that we've been having since then is what needs to be done to the grid to make it more resilient, to be able to support the needs of our constituents as we make our way into the new world, which is a new world that's addressing climate change. So prior to embarking on this important study, I reached out to my mayors to ask them if they had any questions they wanted me to ask on their behalf. I put forward my own questions that I wanted to ask. And just before being able to ask those questions on behalf of my elected representatives that I work very closely with in my community, we had this motion that's presented by MP Angus, whom I admire and respect greatly. And this is a motion, as I said, that I support in the substance, and I'm looking forward to getting to that. But before we get to that, we have a pressing issue that for members like myself, for members, I'm sure there are other members in the committee for whom this is very important, we want to get to this. We need to address this issue. We need to talk about not just expanding and meeting the needs of Canadians tomorrow and figuring out how we're going to provide Canadians with that clean energy that we need to provide them with, because our population is growing, but also how that energy is going to have to be clean energy and how we're going to go about doing that.
Point of order.
And
MP Shifke, there's a point of order, so I'll ask you to hold for 1 second. Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Yes, Chair. I just want to put on the record I've been the subject of a lot of love and respect from my Liberal colleagues today, but not one of them has mentioned TMX pipeline, and that's what we're here to discuss. So I can get by with less love, but I would really like to get something done. So we're now down to 6 minutes. So if he held off the patting me on the back and we could talk about TMX and maybe we get a vote so that we on Thursday we could get down to business. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Angus, for your point of order on rationale and but I believe the main is on the TMX pipeline, but the amendment is on also on bringing this forward before and ahead of any other studies. So it does tie in the previous study on that was underway. So I would ask everybody as you debate, you think of both those items, but I'll let MP Shifke continue because he's providing his rationale on why that study is important, and we should continue with it. So MP Shifke, go ahead. The floor is yours.
thank you very much, Chair. Just in response to my honorable colleague MP Angus on this, I don't have prepared remarks, Chair. This is not, for me, it's not a filibuster. I'm speaking on behalf of my community here. This study is an important one for my community. And what I shared earlier is that I'm not against the study that MP Angus is putting forward. I'm against the idea that it takes precedence over this very important study that we've already started, where we had witnesses come in ready to provide their testimony and share their expertise with us, prepared questions that many of us had collected from our constituents and drafted ourselves, ready to put forward to be able to get those kind of answers. And I just cannot see myself voting in favor.
MP Shifke, once again, we have another point of order. I'm going to ask you to hold right there for a second. Ms. Stubbs on a point of order.
Thanks, Chair. I've just offered to the honourable member a solution for that problem about which he seems concerned. We, of course, have said we would resume with the study afterwards, and also that he should know that there's not a single thing stopping him from getting those witnesses to make written submissions, for getting whoever it is that he wanted to answer certain questions or put certain facts on the record. He can get them to submit that. There's no barrier. But is the member actually honestly making the argument that the Government of Canada has no grip whatsoever on, in terms of current and future electricity generation capacity and distribution, except for the requirement of this study with 5-minute opening comments from private sector proponents and then 6 minutes of question and answer exchanges? Because if that's the argument he's actually making, then, oh man, are we ever in a world of trouble?
On the point of order, MP Shifke, before you proceed, I would ask colleagues to use the point of orders for point of order, not for debate and not for Q&A, but you're more than welcome to have those discussions in private or during your own debate time and address those issues, and others can provide comments when their time is up. So,
Point of order.
we have another point of order here, MP Shifke. Before I go back to you, I'll go to Mr. Angus on a point of order.
You know, people, I just, being that I've been given so much love, I feel I should share it. And Chair, I think you're doing an excellent job, and you've disagreed with almost all of my interventions, and I think technically I was probably right on maybe 10 to 15% of them, but I think you've done it in a very dignified way, and I will study your reflections in the blue so that the next time I ask my colleagues about filibustering, I might be able to take it to an extra level. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, MP Angus, for acknowledging the work of this committee, and I appreciate the work all of you do. And I think everybody today has had an opportunity to interject. It's not one member. I think it's been around this horseshoe, and it's been great. MP Shifke, we do have a few more minutes, and I know there's a few point of orders, so I do want to turn it back over to you, and just I may ask you to pause at some point when we're running at the end of time at our committee. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I guess I'll add the remarks of MP Stubbs that we are in a world of trouble when elected representatives like Ms. Stubbs don't understand the difference between a point of order and debate, and perhaps has not brushed up on procedure in committee. But moving on from that and getting back to what I was saying, I don't see...
MP Shifke, we do have another point of order, so I'm going to ask you to pause once again. And MP Stubbs on a point of order.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the hot tip. Let me just say I'm going to be quite confident that the people of Lakeland will give a verdict on my work and probably aren't quite as concerned about the navel-gazing obsession with our rules in rooms like this, when my constituents are also watching this abysmal waste of time and tax dollars in this display today.
Okay, thank you on that point of order. I will go back to you, MP Shifke, with about 90 seconds. And just to let you know, MP Shifke, we'll have the opportunity to continue on in if you have further commentary at our next meeting, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Stubbs brought up an interesting point, Chair, and that is, why don't we just ask the witnesses to provide written testimony? That does not allow for information to be presented and for follow-up or new questions to be developed. And that just happened in the previous meeting, Chair, where I had the questions I had referred to that were submitted to me by several of my mayors, as well as ones that I drafted. But then there was a witness in the previous meeting that had spoken to a lack of capacity to build transition lines across the country. And that being...
MP Shifke, we have a point of order, so I'll ask you to pause there. MP Angus? on
Thank
a
you
point
so
of order?
much, and I didn't want to interrupt his discourse, but it is 5:30, and I know that he has the floor to continue the filibuster when we come back on Thursday. Who else is on the list? Because at some point, I would like us to get to a vote, so I just was trying to get a sense of Thursday where we're looking at in terms of how the Liberal filibuster is going to continue.
Well, we have 2 more members after Mr. Shifke currently on the list on the amendment. Okay, and others may at the next meeting put their hands up. I'm not sure, but we'll see next meeting. MP Shifke, you do have the floor, and we will continue on with you next meeting. We are at 5:30, and so we will suspend.